Princess Lyriella paced the polished chrome floors of the Elorian embassy, her long ears swaying in irritation as she reviewed yet another diplomatic protocol scroll that threatened to put her to sleep. The galaxy had an endless supply of tedious customs, and today's was particularly absurd. A ceremony involving the ceremonial feeding of holographic phoenixes. Fireproof, of course, because anyone who had tried feeding a real one in the past had ended up singed, or worse, flammable. Lyriella's attendants whispered nervously, trying to keep her long ears from brushing the walls, which were lined with glowing panels that displayed the star charts of every allied system. She did not have time for interruptions, not from scheming counselors or blundering human dignitaries, and yet the universe seemed determined to intervene. The doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, and in stumbled Captain Jared, human, entirely inappropriate, and wearing a suit that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought formal meant doesn't match anything. His boots squeaked on the floor, and he gave a lopsided grin that would have melted a lesser alien heart, or, in Lyriella's case, prompted an involuntary twitch in her long ears. "Princess Lyriella," he said, bowing with a dramatic flourish that almost toppled a floating holographic table. "I hear your ears are, particularly, elegant. Very aerodynamic." He blinked, clearly aware he had said something slightly wrong, but too late to take it back. Lyriella's ears twitched in a way that could only be interpreted as judgment. "Indeed," she said, her tone sharp, though she tried not to laugh. "And you are Captain Jared, correct? I was warned about your species' tendency to, how did the briefing put it, spill things. Guilty as charged," he said, waving a hand vaguely. "But only on planets where gravity is above 0.8 g. Otherwise, I managed to float things accidentally with style." He gave her a wink that would have been charming if it weren't so horribly human. The first moments passed in awkward silence, punctuated by the embassy AI muttering, "Warning. Human presence exceeding cuteness threshold. Risk of galactic embarrassment." "Hi." Lyriella couldn't help the smallest of smiles. The AI was usually more sarcastic than helpful, but it captured her mood perfectly. They moved through the embassy corridors, Jared tripping over the edges of anti-gravity carpets and Lyriella's ears narrowly avoiding a display of levitating crystal spheres. He told a story about accidentally confusing a warp drive lever with a coffee machine on his last mission, and she actually laughed, the sound like wind through crystalline towers. By the time they reached the main council chamber, where holographic maps of potential conflict zones shimmered above a polished table, Lyriella felt an unfamiliar flicker of curiosity, and, more dangerously, amusement. Perhaps humans were less cumbersome than she had assumed. Perhaps they could even be useful. Or at least entertaining. She decided, carefully, not to mention to anyone that she might actually enjoy his company, lest her long-standing vow against marriage, and against humans, become a subject of interstellar gossip. And somewhere in the background, the universe waited, humming with the faint electricity of upcoming chaos, while Lyriella's ears twitched in a way that suggested she might just be in for a very unusual day. The shuttle lurched violently as it detached from the embassy docking bay, sending Lyriella nearly into the control console. Her long ears flared, brushing against the walls in protest, and she shot Jared a glare that could have vaporized a star, if looks were weaponized. He grinned, as if daring her to explode, and reached out to steady her, only to trip over the coiled tether of the AI interface. "Smooth," Lyriella muttered, her tone dry enough to crisp toast, while the shuttle's AI, named Quip, chirped sarcastically, "Observation. Human competence remains within statistically acceptable chaos levels." Somehow, their mission had been simple, escort a fragile peace envoy to Zifra, but simplicity had a way of dissolving into absurdity when humans were involved. One moment, they were gliding through the standard hyperlane corridors. The next, a rogue gravity fluctuation sent them tumbling through 0G like startled, glittering fish. Lyriella's ears floated like golden sails, and Jared flailed, hands gripping random panels, muttering a string of curses that sounded suspiciously like a recipe for disaster. She almost laughed, but a growing sense of danger kept her composure in check. Well, mostly. the shuttle's semi-sentient systems were surprisingly judgmental. Captain Jared, the emergency oxygen reserves are at 50%. I suggest minimizing flailing or embracing heroic death dramatically. Quip intoned, with its usual dry wit. Jared saluted the AI. Yes, Quip. Noted. Heroic death postponed. Lyriella arched an eyebrow. She was beginning to suspect this human might survive purely by accident and charm, and somehow, she didn't entirely disapprove. Their predicament worsened when a micrometeor storm erupted unexpectedly near a dormant black hole. Sparks flew from the outer hull, lighting up the cabin with eerie blue arcs. Lyriella's ears twitched with irritation and excitement. This was her element. The chaos, the danger. But having to rely on Jared was novel. He frantically pressed buttons, speaking aloud in a mixture of technical jargon and panicked improvisation. If I reroute the antimatter feed through the sublight compensator, we might just not explode. His confidence was questionable, but his optimism was infectious. In the ensuing chaos, they found themselves trapped in a maintenance corridor, floating among loose panels and stray tools. Lyriella, with elegant precision, pinned a drifting wrench with one hand while simultaneously giving Jared a glare that could have sliced titanium. He grinned sheepishly, holding a floating cup of what she assumed was now coffee, though she suspected it had achieved sentience. You know, he said, in some cultures this counts as a bonding experience. Very romantic. Lyriella's laughter escaped despite herself, echoing off the metallic walls, a sound she rarely allowed anyone to hear. They shared small victories, stabilizing the shuttle's trajectory, dodging a microasteroid like dancers in zero gravity, exchanging jokes about the absurdity of interstellar protocol manuals. Trust began to thread between them, subtle but tangible, wrapped in humor and mutual survival instincts. And somewhere deep in the cold, flickering light of the cabin, Lyriella realized that perhaps humans, messy, awkward, endearingly reckless humans, weren't entirely intolerable. By the time they breached the outer rim of Zifrin space, Lyriella's long ears had settled, no longer bristling in irritation. Jared floated nearby, grinning at her with that impossible human charm, and for the first time, she allowed herself a thought that made her stomach flutter like the wings of a tiny starship. Maybe, just maybe, she could enjoy having him around, and the galaxy might not immediately implode because of it. The corridors of the Zifrin embassy shimmered with iridescent light, casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors. Princess Lyriella's long ears twitched with a mixture of irritation and anticipation as she led Captain Jared through a maze of security doors and hovering surveillance drones. The sabotage had been traced to a faction of counselors eager to ignite war between their worlds, and every step forward was a delicate dance of diplomacy, deception, and, occasionally, zero-gravity acrobatics. Jared stumbled over an anti-grav tile, nearly colliding with a floating tea service. I swear, he muttered. Humans make everything more dramatic. Lyriella suppressed a grin, which she would later claim was a twitch caused by the fluorescent lighting. They reached the central chamber, where holographic star maps glowed above the council table, depicting potential conflict zones in pulsating red. Lyriella studied the layout with precision, plotting the quickest path to expose the saboteur's scheme. Jared hovered beside her, nervously twisting a screwdriver that seemed far too small for the advanced console before them. You know, he said, if diplomacy fails, we could always just blow up the problem with style. His grin was infectious, and Lyriella allowed herself a quiet laugh. The confrontation was chaotic. Counselors rushed forward with concealed weapons that hummed with plasma energy. Jared ducked, swinging a repurposed fire extinguisher with surprising effectiveness, knocking one counselor into a holographic display. Lyriella's ears twitched in exasperation, then flicked with amusement as she used her diplomatic badge to deflect energy blasts, all while navigating with the fluid elegance that came from centuries of royal training. Even Quip, the AI, injected commentary. Captain, you are now officially considered a hazard and a miracle. Congratulations. Amid the chaos, Lyriella realized how much she had changed. She had once sworn to never trust anyone, to never allow partnership to complicate her life. Yet here she was, relying on a human whose courage and absurd humor had become indispensable. Jared, for his part, had grown from a clumsy outsider into a resourceful ally who could anticipate her moves and, somehow, anticipate her thoughts. Together, they dismantled the sabotage, exposed the conspirators, and prevented the first sparks of interstellar war from igniting. As the dust settled and the counselors were restrained in floating containment cells, Lyriella and Jared shared a quiet moment in the observation deck, staring at the swirling galaxy below. Jared offered her a crooked smile, leaning casually against the railing. "You know, for someone who swore off marriage, you make a pretty good team player." Lyriella's ears flicked thoughtfully. "Perhaps vows are meant to be reconsidered," she admitted, a smile tugging at her lips. The stars outside glittered like scattered diamonds, and for the first time, Lyriella felt the delicate balance of duty and desire. She had faced danger, navigated the absurdities of human quirks, and discovered trust and connection where she least expected it. Jared's hand found hers, and she allowed it, steady and reassuring. The galaxy was still vast, unpredictable, and occasionally absurd, but together, they had turned chaos into harmony. In the quiet aftermath, Lyriella's long ears twitched one final time, this time with a sense of contentment, perhaps even joy. A human had walked into her life and changed it forever, not by force, but by courage, humor, and an unexpected capacity to inspire trust. And for once, she welcomed the uncertainty of what the future might bring.